On February 28, 2026, at H hour, more than 100 aircraft launched simultaneously from carrier decks and land bases across the Middle East. Not in sequence, not in waves that arrived minutes apart, simultaneously. Fighters, bombers, electronic warfare aircraft, refueling tankers, airborne early warning platforms, and unmanned systems all lifted off within the same narrow window and converged on their targets across Iran at the same moment. At the same time, U.S. Navy destroyers in the Arabian Sea opened their vertical launch systems and began firing Tomahawk cruise missiles in coordinated salvos. U.S. Cyber Command and U.S. Space Command activated operations to disrupt Iranian radar networks and communications links before the first aircraft crossed the border. Every target on the list was struck within the same compressed time frame, not over hours, over minutes. The military term for this is time on target, and understanding it is the key to understanding how the United States effectively erased Iran's naval capability in the first 48 hours of Operation Epic Fury. Time on target is one of the oldest tactical concepts in modern warfare. The idea is simple and devastating in equal measure. If you fire one missile at a target, that target's defenses have time to respond. They detect the incoming weapon, activate countermeasures, scramble intercept aircraft, warn other assets in the area. One threat is manageable. If you fire 1,000 weapons at 1,000 different targets and you time them all to arrive at precisely the same moment, the entire defensive system collapses. There is nothing to prioritize. There is no sequence to manage. Every radar, every command center, every missile battery, every naval base, every communication node faces an incoming threat simultaneously, and the defenders have to make an impossible choice about what to protect first. They cannot protect everything. Nothing can. The United States military has refined time on target to a level of precision that was unimaginable even 20 years ago. GPS-guided weapons can be programmed to delay their detonation by seconds or minutes, allowing weapons fired at different times from different platforms to arrive at their targets simultaneously. An F-15E Strike Eagle, launched from Jordan, can be timed to arrive at its target in western Iran at the same second that a Tomahawk fired from a destroyer in the Arabian Sea arrives at a target in the south, and a B-2 bomber that launched from the continental United States hours earlier arrives at a target in the north. Same second. Thousands of miles of separation, dozens of different weapon systems, all converging. The Iranians knew this was coming. They had studied American doctrine for decades. They understood time on target as a concept. They had built their defenses in the full knowledge that the United States would try to execute it. What they discovered on February 28th is that knowing something is coming and being able to stop it are entirely different problems. Iran had spent 30 years building what it believed was an answer to American military power. The strategy was called asymmetric warfare, and it had two core premises. First, you do not try to match American technology directly. You build cheap, numerous, and distributed capabilities that are difficult to target and impossible to exhaust. Second, you build layered defenses around the assets that matter most and accept that some things will be hit while protecting others. Iran's naval strategy was the purest expression of this doctrine. The Islamic Republic of Iran Navy operated Iran's conventional surface combatants and submarines. It had frigates of the Bayandor, Alvand, and Jamaran classes. It had a small submarine force including 3 Russian Kilo-class attack submarines and a fleet of homegrown midget submarines. It had a forward basing ship, the IRIN, capable of supporting operations far from Iranian shores. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy operated separately. It controlled hundreds of small fast attack craft, missile boats, and speedboats configured for swarm tactics. Its entire doctrine was built around one scenario: drawing American warships into the confined waters of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, where the IRGC's numerical advantage and knowledge of local waters would negate American technological superiority. The Paycap-class missile boats, the Haudong-class vessels, the C-14 fast patrol craft, hundreds of speedboats that could appear from behind islands, from hidden inlets, from any direction at once. Iranian commanders had publicly described this force as sufficient to challenge technologically superior navies. They had rehearsed the scenarios in exercises. They had placed coastal anti-ship missile batteries along the length of Iran's coastline. They had positioned mines in patterns designed to deny the Strait of Hormuz. They had developed long-range ballistic missiles specifically designed to target American aircraft carriers at sea. In early February 2026, just weeks before Operation Epic Fury began, Iranian naval forces conducted the Marine Security Belt 2026 exercise alongside Chinese and Russian warships near the port of Chabahar. It was a deliberate signal. Iran was not isolated. It had partners. Its forces were ready. 2 weeks later, time on target turned every calculation inside out. The opening strike had been planned with one objective above all others: destroy Iran's ability to coordinate a response before it could use what it had. The centerpiece of that objective was the targeting of Iran's leadership and command infrastructure in the first minutes of the operation. On February 28, 2026, the opening attack targeted the Leadership House compound in Tehran. Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader for 35 years, was killed in the strike. Early on March 1st, Iranian state media confirmed his death. The implications for Iranian naval operations were immediate and catastrophic. Iran's asymmetric naval doctrine did not operate independently of central command. The fast attack craft, the swarm boats, the coastal missile batteries, the submarines, all of them required functioning command and control links to coordinate timing, targeting, and engagement zones. The Hudong-class missile boats needed orders about which targets to engage and when. The Paycap-class vessels needed coordination to ensure their swarm attacks arrived simultaneously rather than in a sequence that American defenses could manage one element at a time. With Khamenei dead and command infrastructure struck across multiple provinces simultaneously, those coordination links collapsed. Iranian naval units in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz did not receive immediate orders to disperse, redeploy, or initiate the swarm tactics that had formed the core of their doctrine. They sat at their piers. Satellite imagery captured the consequences in detail that required no interpretation. U.S. forces had struck nearly 2,000 targets with more than 2,000 munitions in the opening phase of the operation. Iran's primary Persian Gulf naval bases at Bandar Abbas and Konarak showed multiple fires, sunken vessels, and destroyed infrastructure. The Jamaran-class frigates were struck while moored at their piers before they could deploy. The forward basing ship IRIS Makran was hit at Bandar Abbas before it could leave port. The drone carrier Shahid Bagheri, which Iran had unveiled just weeks earlier as a symbol of its growing capability, was hit by Tomahawk cruise missiles while docked at Bandar Abbas. It was destroyed before it could launch a single drone. CENTCOM tracked the result in the Gulf of Oman separately. 2 days before the operation, Iran had 11 warships in the Gulf of Oman. Within 48 hours of Epic Fury beginning, CENTCOM confirmed the number had reached 0. 2 days before, 11 ships. 48 hours later, 0. The submarine dimension of the operation is the piece that received the least public attention in the immediate aftermath. It may be the most strategically significant. Iran operated a small but potentially dangerous submarine force. 3 Kilo-class attack submarines acquired from Russia in the 1990s. A larger number of homegrown midget submarines, small vessels capable of operating in shallow coastal waters where larger submarines cannot follow. Anti-ship mines that these submarines could deploy in the approaches to the Strait of Hormuz. If even one of Iran's submarines had survived the opening strike and successfully deployed mines across the strait's navigable channels, the impact on global oil markets could have been catastrophic. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 20 million barrels of crude oil and petroleum products per day, roughly 20% of global consumption. Closing it, even temporarily, would send oil prices to levels not seen since the 1970s. Several of Iran's submarines were present at Bandar Abbas at the start of the operation. U.S. strikes targeted Iranian submarine infrastructure along with surface combatants. Satellite photographs taken after the initial strikes showed submarines still present at Bandar Abbas, their status unclear. What was clear from CENTCOM reporting was that the 11 warships that had been in the Gulf of Oman before the operation were gone, and no submarine had successfully deployed mines that closed the strait. The most dramatic submarine action came not in the Gulf but thousands of miles away, in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Sri Lanka. The Iranian frigate Dena had been participating in the International Fleet Review 2026 hosted in Visakhapatnam, India. The exercise required all participating ships to carry no ammunition. The Dena was transiting home to Iran, essentially defenseless when the war began. The U.S. Navy had been tracking the Dena throughout its participation in the review. The USS Charlotte, a Virginia-class attack submarine, was positioned in the Indian Ocean. On March 6, 2026, the USS Charlotte torpedoed the IRIS Dena approximately 40 nautical miles south of Galle, Sri Lanka. The Dena issued a distress signal before sinking, prompting search and rescue operations by the Sri Lanka Navy and Air Force. It was the first ship sunk by an American submarine in active combat since World War II. The first ship sunk by a submarine in any conflict since the British sank the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano during the Falkland Islands War of 1982. The message of that sinking extended beyond the Dena. No Iranian naval vessel anywhere in the world was safe, not in the Gulf, not in the Arabian Sea, not transiting the Indian Ocean with no weapons aboard. The U.S. Navy's submarine force, largely invisible throughout the entire operation, had been tracking Iranian ships across multiple ocean basins and could reach any of them at any time. By the end of the first week of Operation Epic Fury, the assessment from U.S. officials was stark. More than 20 Iranian vessels had been sunk or rendered inoperable. Some estimates placed total losses between 30 and 42 surface ships. The Shahid Bagheri drone carrier was gone. The IRIS Dena was on the bottom of the Indian Ocean. Iran's naval presence in the Gulf of Oman had been eliminated entirely. Vice Admiral Bradford Cooper, the commander of U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, described the outcome plainly in a video statement. He said the two carrier strike groups had the Iranians backed into their own ports. He characterized the operation as ahead of its game plan. Iran's response to the naval destruction it had suffered was the information operation described in earlier coverage. The claim that 4 Iranian ballistic missiles had struck the USS Abraham Lincoln. 5 consecutive days of state media reporting on a carrier that was never hit. The fabricated videos. The propaganda operation designed to tell an Iranian domestic audience that their military had struck back against the Navy that had just eliminated their fleet. The Abraham Lincoln had not been hit. It was launching aircraft. What Iran had built over 30 years, the swarm boats, the fast attack craft, the asymmetric doctrine, the exercises with China and Russia, the public declarations about its ability to close the Strait of Hormuz, all of it had been designed for a war that arrived on a different timeline than Iran expected. Iran expected to use its navy. It expected the conflict to open with American ships entering confined waters and being swarmed by hundreds of fast attack craft from every direction, while coastal missiles fired from hidden batteries. What happened instead was that the command network that would have coordinated those attacks was destroyed in the first minutes of the operation. The ships at Bandar Abbas and Konarak never received orders. The fast attack craft never left port in coordinated swarms. The submarines never deployed mines. Time on target had not just destroyed ships and bases. It had destroyed the system that would have made those ships and bases dangerous. There is a final element of the time on target equation that deserves specific attention. The coordination of the strike was executed not just across multiple weapon systems and multiple platforms, but across multiple domains simultaneously. U.S. Cyber Command operated against Iranian radar and communication networks before and during the strikes. U.S. Space Command contributed satellite support for targeting and communications. The combination of kinetic strikes, electronic warfare, and cyber operations created a layered assault that attacked not just Iran's physical military assets, but its ability to perceive what was happening and respond to it. The EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft flew ahead of the strike packages to suppress Iranian integrated air defense systems. Iran's radar operators were facing jamming and electronic interference at the same moment that their command networks were being disrupted by cyber operations, at the same moment that 100 aircraft and dozens of Tomahawk missiles were converging on their targets. What each individual Iranian defender experienced in those first minutes was not clarity, but chaos. The radar screens that were supposed to show them where the threats were coming from were showing them interference and ghost signals. The communications channels they needed to call for orders were not connecting. The orders that should have been coming from Tehran were not coming. Into that chaos, the weapons arrived on target simultaneously. Time on target did not win the naval war against Iran by itself. The carrier presence that had been building since January, the alliance with Israel that provided strike capacity from multiple directions, the submarine force that had been tracking Iranian ships for weeks, the logistics chain that kept aircraft fueled and weapons magazines full, all of these elements were essential. But time on target was the mechanism that turned all of those elements into a single, simultaneous, overwhelming event that Iran's defenses had no framework for managing. The U.S. Navy had not just brought more firepower than Iran could handle. It had brought more firepower than Iran could see, understand, or respond to, all at exactly the same moment. That is what erased the fleet. This is Naval Depth. Subscribe and stay with us as this story continues.